Welcome to the Fair and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Consumer spending can give a fascinating insight into how the economy is travelling, but some types of consumers seem almost immune to any slowdown. According to Roy Morgan Research, we operate on a two-speed consumer economy. 10 million Australians have a traditional mindset when it comes to spending, but about 5 million Australians are considered new economic order or NEO customers. And those consumers apparently spend up to 300% more than traditional consumers and are less affected by cost of living pressures. This data has been used by brands like LVMH, Qantas, David Jones, Macquarie Bank and Lexus. Another is Australian mattress company AH Beard, whose CEO is Tony Pearson. Tony, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you, Sean.
What exactly is a new economic order, NEO, consumer?
Sure. Well, there's been, a vast array of research into trying to segment out buying behaviour in markets for a long period of time. And NEO is not a buying segment in the traditional way. It's more a general mindset of a particular consumer. The NEO particularly is someone that, as you just sort of spoke to, typically spends more and they spend more often.
Okay, so I imagine they're very valuable, but they don't necessarily come from any particular demographic, or it's kind of more a state of mind thing.
It is. If I talk about NEO in the way the founder of NEOs is an Australian gentleman, Dr. Ross Honeywell. And Dr. Ross undertook a 10-year piece of research in trying to unpack buying behaviour of populations. And after that 10 years, quite simply said there's only really two types of buyers. And the way he describes them is not in terms of your typical sociographic, it's more about the key mindset. The two are a traditional buyer. They've been around forever. They're price-led. Everything starts and ends in price. They're purchasing more based on functionality, if you like. And the other type is your NEO, a little bit more progressive. They typically like to take a little bit more control and ownership into key decisions. They focus not as much on functionality as they do on sense of purpose and their ability to align themselves to whatever the values and purposes are of the brand that they're attracted to.
Is it something that there is more and more of? I mean, you hear, I suppose I'm thinking ESG and some of those environmental issues, but kind of broadly beyond that, the idea of aligning yourself to brands, is that something that's always happened, or are people more conscious of that now, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's certainly emerging more. And, I think Dr. Ross in his own piece of research really sort of talks back to where did we start to see this separation between your traditional buyer and the new economic order. And that sort of really accelerated post the early 90s. So I think we're starting to see a widening or an emergence of the NEO buyer. And it's a little bit oversimplistic to say just pure NEO. So, just to use some of the Australian statistics, 52% of the Australian buying consumer market, so with the NEO research and Roy Morgan, we talk about people that purchase 14 years and older, 52% of the population would be your traditional market. The other 48% are NEOs, and NEOs just broadly have two types. There's those that have built capacity to spend already, and those that have the same mindset but have not yet built capacity. So when we're talking that 48% of NEO and aspiring NEOs, that segment of the market is responsible for 77% of all discretionary spend. When we just look at the NEO, that has already built the potential and capacity to spend, you're talking about 24% of the population. Just in retail, they account for over 41% of retail sales. So they're quite a powerful force.
Incredibly valuable to an organisation like AH Beard, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. We are in Australia a traditional manufacturer, and we don't directly interact with our consumers. We interact through our partners, our retailers, hotel providers and others. And so when you're looking at how you market your brand and your products behind them, you've got to be very, very conscious about how you use that limited spend. So the NEO methodology has allowed us to get very particular around how we position our brand, how we communicate with that neo audience as our preferred target market.
Stay with me, Tony. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Tony Pearson, CEO of AH Beard. When you were talking then, I was thinking to myself, I'm not a neo, but then as you went on, I thought, actually, I am a neo, which I suppose the point there is as you get older, like some of us do, and you have greater means, you can you shift into becoming a neo?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting question. So actually, that's not necessarily the case. So, I'd hate to be trying to paint a picture that a traditional consumer doesn't necessarily have high affluence. In fact, they can. It's a smaller proportion, though. So if we use Roy Morgan's big spender database, only 6% of those that would be defined as a big spender would be a traditional consumer. Over 90% of them are, in fact, neos. There are neos at every age demographic. They typically skew slightly younger, but there are neos at every age demographic, as there are traditionals. So it's more a mindset or a behavioural pattern, if you like, and so therefore it's not necessarily something you grow into.
Yeah, so potentially there are big spenders who aren't neos as well.
Yeah, correct. But their mindset's still the same, right? Typically a begrudging spender would prefer to look at function over form, probably more conservative in their approach to purchase than a neo buyer.
So how does a brand like AH Beard use this sort of information?
So we still build products that are available whether you're a neo or a traditional. And obviously we have a market that covers both consumer types. So we don't try and exclude anyone from wanting to get access or being attractive to our business, our brand, or our products. What we do is be very conscious around the way we communicate, the style of communication, the format, the forum that we're using, the channel to market, and everything is built around being most attractive to the neo market. And what's been found to be true is if you market that way, a way that is most attractive to a neo market, the traditional consumers will still follow. But the opposite is not true. So in way of an example, if you look at our particular product, mattresses is our primary product, they have become quite a commoditized product. Now, that's because most people actually don't understand the true value of the product. Sleep in AH Beard is the first pillar of health, right alongside nutrition and exercise. It's integral, and sleep is integral to human wellness. However, that's not really well known, so the mysterious rectangle box has become a little bit commoditized, and how that normally shows up in retail is let's shout from the rooftops about the discount or the percentage off. And when you shout at a neo, it actually turns them off.
Yeah.
So they are more inclined to be attractive to something that allows them an element of self-discovery. They can have a little bit more control in the learning process and the buying into what actually sits behind the brand and the product. Beauty and form are so much more attractive to a neo audience than they would be to the pure functionality that's probably driving the traditional purchasing decision.
Do you think this is a growing, I don't want to use the word trend, but as society evolves, there'll be a great proportion of neos amongst us?
It's an interesting question. My personal assumption is yes. I think because what we're talking about is a behavioural model, right? A societal model. And so populations change when the environment around them changes, and our environment's changing rapidly. And certainly the consumer environment has continued to change exponentially, since the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And so that bifurcation that Dr. Ross talks about, that separation between the traditional economic order and the new economic order, I think will continue to evolve. And now whether that changes the proportion of populations or not dramatically is probably secondary.
Yeah.
There is a real need to be able to bring authenticity, transparency, alignment to purpose back into brands and products and alleviate some of that commoditization that we spoke about earlier across a lot of products and brands.
And the bottom line in all this for a company like AHBeard, but pretty much everyone, is they're a very valuable customer set.
Yeah, particularly in difficult economic times. So time over time, and because of the age of the research and the data sets, both that Dr. Ross and certainly Roy Morgan through the single source database have access to, we're able to watch behaviour over an extended period. So we can track consumer confidence levels, go back to pre-GFC. What happened to consumer confidence through the pandemic, post the pandemic, through the pent-up demand effect, as the interest rates and cost of living has increased. We've been able to track this incredibly well. So rather than just looking at a population and saying consumer confidence sits here, we're able to have a look at how does consumer confidence show up for traditional consumers versus neos. And there's a big gap. And what we watch time and time again is neos lead recovery. So they spend more often, and their consumers levels are higher, therefore their recovery rates are faster. So looking at the post-GFC time, so I was looking at that just a couple of years ago, trying to predict what do we think might happen post-COVID. So what we saw was a 9-month delay in consumer confidence exceeding population confidence norms between a neo and a traditional consumer. So they absolutely led the recovery in that period, and we're seeing signs of them leading it again at the moment.
Absolutely fascinating. Tony, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thank you.
That was Tony Pearson, Chief Executive Officer of AHBeard. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.